I'm Suzanne Borden, Moment Magazine Zoominar producer and director of the Jewish Political Voices Project. Today's session is being recorded and the link will be available later this week. Following today's program, be sure to visit Moment's website where you can read much more about the Jewish Political Voices Project and meet the rest of our participants. Also, be sure to sign up for next week's Zoominar, Culinary Travels with Joe Nathan. Now for today's program. Joining us today is Nadine Epstein, Moment's editor-in-chief and founder of the Jewish Political Voices Project. In a little bit, we will be joined by four of our JPVP participants, former Congresswoman Shelley Berkley from Nevada, Rabbi Dan Levin from Florida, Ruth Kantrowitz from Wisconsin, and Mark Goldhaber from North Carolina. We will also hear from Lynn, Washington Bureau Chief from the Chicago Sun-Times. Lynn has appeared on CNN and other outlets as an analyst and is a former fellow at Harvard University's Institute of Politics. She is in Northwestern University's Medill Hall of Achievement and was named by Washington Magazine as one of the Capital's 50 top journalists. Now I will turn over the program to Nadine, who will give an overview of the Jewish Political Voices Project.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. We launched this project in August 2019. We were wondering, what could we do to explore the 2020 presidential campaign and election on a deeper level? We wanted to do more than just write about the polls and the latest poll numbers, and particularly after 2016, when we saw that polls can be very misleading and for a variety of reasons, including their wide margin of errors. So we created this project so that we could take a deep dive into the American Jewish community. The goal was to learn and to understand the American Jewish community, not to convince anyone, not to debate. It's a research project, which is practicing civil dialogue. We selected 30 engaged Jews, 3 from each of 10 swing states. We're pretty good on guessing the swing states, but we did not include Georgia. We had no idea that it was going to be a swing state at that time. The participants ranged from 21 years old to 92 years old. We selected 19 Democrats, 10 Republicans, and 1 independent. They roughly reflected the makeup of the American Jewish community, which is generally in recent decades about 3/4 Democrat and 3/4 Republican. And we went out of our way to include conservatives. We actually overcompensated and included 1/3 Republicans, which was a higher percentage than is in the American Jewish political makeup. We wanted to be sure to hear voices from both sides. Even though polls are unreliable, I'm going to just tell you briefly what the polls are today. A very recent Pew survey found that the current breakdown is 30% for Trump, 67% of American Jews for Biden. The even more recent 2020 AJC study, which came out 2 days ago, showed that 75% of American Jews would choose Joe Biden and 22% President Donald Trump. In 2016, 16% voted for Trump, 62% for Hillary Clinton, and 7% chose another candidate and 14% did not vote. And with that just in our mind, let's go to the Jewish Political Voices Project. It's been an amazing project, and this is just the first taste of our findings, and introducing today some of our amazing participants. And we're going to first check in, though, with Suzanne Borden, who also, in addition to being the producer of all of our Zoominars, happens to be the director of this project. So today she's wearing 2 hats, and I'm going to ask her a few questions about the things that she found the most striking. Just tell us, what are some of the things you found the most striking about this project? And unmute yourself.
That's usually my job to tell people. Before I get into a few of the big findings, I just wanted to give a little overview of the type of people that we have in our project. We have a really well-accomplished, very impressive group of 30 participants, as you said, spanning the age range of 21 to 92. We have people that have served in all levels of government, like former Congresswoman Shelley Berkley, who you'll hear from in a little while. We also have a former diplomat, state representative, and 2 local city council members. Our participants include lawyers, business owners, nonprofit leaders. We also have 3 rabbis, one of which is a veteran. and several people in the healthcare field, while others are educators and 2 were in college as of up until May. 3 of our participants have immigrated to the United States at different stages in their lives. And while not all of our voters are involved in the Jewish community, many of them have served as leaders in their synagogues, federations, and Jewish community relations council. So we really have a wide, diverse group of people. In terms of what we found, I think one of the biggest things that we saw was this internal struggle for people to choose a candidate. And we found it in both Democrats and Republicans. It was not unique to one party. Most people take elections pretty seriously, but I think this year in particular, people really felt the weight of their decisions, and people really struggled with who they were going to vote for. I think last year at this time, when the field was so wide, many of our voters were truly undecided. And when we asked them a month later, some had selected a candidate, but by the following month, they were back to being undecided. And really in January, some of those people were still unsure. One person from our project, Svi Shapiro from North Carolina, he said it was like deciding between your heart and your head, meaning that there's the candidate that you really have connected with in your heart, you really want them, but ultimately in your head, you don't necessarily believe that they're going to win the general election. So they had to make a compromise for themselves, and they decided who they would vote for and who they were going to vote for in the primary. So in the end, we know what happened. The field pretty much quickly coalesced around Biden, as did all of our participants. However, I do want to note that 3 of our participants were voters. 3 of our voters had said that if Bernie Sanders had been the Democratic nominee, they would not have voted for him. They never had to wrestle with that, but that was something that they were considering. As for the Republicans in our project, many of them struggled with this as well. I do want to say that all 10 of the Republicans said that they wish that the president would stop tweeting and focus more on governing. 4 of our Republicans, 2, I want to note, had voted for Obama both times, never wavered for their support for the president. However, 6 of our voters did. For those 6 Republicans, they wrestled with their belief in the good policy that they have seen taking place versus the character traits of the president. And again, they struggled with their decision. Some were intrigued with Amy Klobuchar. Some would have voted for Mike Bloomberg. But in the end, 2 decided to vote for Trump again, or actually not again. 1 had not voted last time for Trump. 2 decided to vote for Biden, and 2 decided to vote for someone else. So really, we saw how seriously people were taking their responsibility to vote and vote for the person that they thought could win. So that was that one. The second one that, which is no surprise to anybody, is really about the lack of civil discourse and how on both sides of the aisle, all of our participants were really saddened, angered, and frustrated by this inability to have a conversation with people who they disagree with. The idea that we've lost the art of conversation and healthy debate is very disheartening to our participants. And there's a real concern that regardless who wins the election, how do we start finding some common ground? Nadine?
So Suzanne, so there's so much more to come. We have actually so many findings, but this is only an hour that we have today. And we want to introduce some of our amazing participants in the study. Suzanne, you want to introduce them one by one, and then I'm going to ask them each a few questions. We're only going to have a few minutes with each of them to check in with each of them.
We're going to start with Shelley Berkley. And let me just give me a moment to bring Shelley on screen here. Hi, Shelley.
Hello, Suzanne.
Hi, thank you for joining us. Before we hear from Shelley, I'm just going to give a little overview about Nevada and the Jewish population there. Just to put in perspective, the Jewish population in Nevada is 76,200 people. And I do want to make a note that our numbers are part of, our numbers come from the American Jewish Population Project at Brandeis University's Steinhardt Social Research Institute. So we thank them for their information. I have to say, something I found surprising is that the percent of Jews of the total population is 2.5%. I was surprised to hear how large the Jewish population was in Nevada. In terms of Jewish voter party identification, Democrats make up 44.2%. Republicans 20.3%, and independents make up 32.8%, with other being 2.8%. And I will say, when we were going through these numbers for all of the states, that we were surprised by how many independent Jewish voters there are out there across the country. In 2016, the presidential results were such that Clinton won 48% and Trump won 46%. Nadine, I'll hand it over to you. And just to let everybody know, Shelley is a former Democratic Congresswoman from Las Vegas who held the seat for 7 terms. And she is now the CEO and Senior Provost for Touro University Western Division in Las Vegas.
Thank you so much, Shelley, for being here today. So who was your first choice and who are you going to vote for?
Joe Biden from the beginning of the primary process, and was very happy and relieved that he took off the way he did, because he lost the Nevada caucus. And then, of course, he rolled into South Carolina, and that was the beginning of the end for everybody else. I'm one of the 3 that said if Bernie had been selected, I would not have voted for Bernie. I served with him in Congress. I didn't like him much then. I don't like him much now. And I felt that I didn't think that he could win this election. And one of the most important things in this election is to defeat Donald Trump. And I did not think Bernie would be able to do that. He's as equally divisive as Trump is, and I wasn't going to buy one, for the other, or to exchange one for the other. I was a big Hillary supporter in the last election. I worked very closely with her when I was in Congress, and I liked her very much. And I am voting for Biden in the general election, and I'm voting early tomorrow. So I will have cast my vote in person tomorrow.
So I also noticed you were one of 3 people in our survey, in our study, who supported Biden in the beginning, and all of you connected with the Democratic Party. All of you, or 2 of you, had been. One is Alma Hernandez, also, who serves in the Arizona State House, and you were 2 of the most kind of real supporters of Biden from the beginning.
I like Joe Biden a lot. I've known him personally, and I don't want to overstate that, but I worked with him when I was in Congress. Prior to that, I was very active in a number of Jewish organizations, AIPAC, JACPAC, and a number of others, but those are the more political minded. And he was always very responsive to us. And so I knew him long before I went to Congress, and thought that he was the person that I could best support in the election.
Okay, so let me ask a couple other very quick questions. What are your top 3 news sources? Because this was something we kept track of throughout. And
that's interesting. I'd like to sound very high-minded and say Wall Street Journal, New York Times, but the reality is all politics is local, and I was in office for 30 years. I get my information from the Las Vegas Review-Journal and the Las Vegas Sun. If I'm watching cable news, it's going to be CNN and MSNBC. I do, and I feel like torturing myself, turn on Fox News just to hear what the other side is saying. And I find, interestingly enough, that oftentimes the networks or the cable news, they're not tracking each other at all. So what's a big story on MSNBC and CNN, Fox isn't covering it all, and vice versa. And so I found that very intriguing as well. And then other magazines, I'm not great on social media. I think I'm dating myself, but it isn't my primary source of information.
Okay, well, that could be good. So once the election is over, regardless of who wins, How do we move on as a country? Briefly, give me a couple thoughts about that.
Well, I think if Trump wins, I don't think he's going to change one bit, and we're going to continue down this very steep slide into what I have absolutely no idea, other than I'm revolted by it. I'm hoping, and one of the reasons I supported Biden from the beginning is I'm so anxious for normal. I'm tired of the drama. He's not a no drama Obama, but on the other, and I had issues with Obama. I served when he was president, and we clashed quite often on a number of issues. So it's not, I don't expect 100% from anybody, but I think that his normalcy, his ability to work across the aisle is going to set an example for the rest of us to behave in a civilized manner and to just elevate the rhetoric, tone down the rhetoric, and start acting more like the great country that the United States of America is. I'm not paranoid. I don't feel that America is second best by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm tired of seeing this nation behave in a manner that is not, in my opinion, appropriate for a great nation.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Oh, and let me say this, if I may. While the rest of my family, we all are on the same page, I have many lifelong friends in Las Vegas and across the country that are voting for Trump, support Trump, and we have made a decision that our friendship is more important than this election. And so we are very careful what we say and treat each other with respect. But I understand how they feel. I understand why they're supporting Trump. I disagree with it, but I respect them and I respect their position.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Suzanne, back to you. You're on mute.
Yep, so I'm not used to having to unmute myself. Okay, so we're just gonna let's get Ruth up here on the screen. Add spotlight. Okay, hi Ruth, how are you?
Hi everyone.
Hi, so first I'm going to introduce the state of Wisconsin. Ruth, just first to know, Ruth is a Republican from Madison, Wisconsin. She's a foster parent and a surrogate and owner of several group homes in Wisconsin. In terms of the Jewish state, the Jewish population in Wisconsin, there is a total population of 46,400 Jews, which is less than 1% of the population in Wisconsin. There are 47.3% who identify as Democrats, 18.9% who identify as Republican, and again, another large number of independent Jewish voters at 31.5%. For the 2016 presidential election, Clinton came in at 47%, while Trump came in at 48%. So definitely one of our swing states. Thank you.
Great. So Ruth, going to have very different kind of answers here. Who was your first choice? And how did your thinking evolve, or did it evolve? And who did you vote for, or who are you going to vote for? Oh, are you frozen?
Oh, how about we move? Should we go on to
1 second to see if she unfreezes quickly.
She just lost her video feed, I think.
Oh, she did. Okay, so
yeah. We'll get back on. So why don't we let's move on to Dan. If you'd like to unmute yourself, and then let me get myself back on video. Okay. Please welcome, we have Rabbi Dan Levin, a Democrat from Boca Raton, and he is a congregational rabbi. And in terms of Florida, which is our big state this year, I guess in every election, the total Jewish population is 736,300 people, with 3.5% of the population. Democrats come in at 48.1%, while Republicans come in at 20%. and independents at 29.2%. Clinton took Florida with 48%, but Trump won with 49% last time.
Great. Hi, Dan. Rabbi Dan, thank you for joining us. So who was your first choice in the primary, and how did your thinking evolve, and who are you going to vote for, or who did you vote for?
So for me, I bounced around from a lot of different candidates, and it took a while to settle on one. And in some ways it was settled for me as Joe Biden emerged from South Carolina as the lead candidate. But I was searching for a really good, solid moderate. I was not enamored with the candidates that were on the far left of the spectrum. And there were candidates that were in the middle that intrigued me, like Amy Klobuchar, like the vice president, like candidates that were not getting any traction, though I liked them a lot, like Steve Bullock. And ultimately, now I'm supporting Vice President Biden.
Great. I think you also mentioned Pete Buttigieg when we talked the other day.
Pete was in there for a while. Kamala Harris was in there for a while. Mike Bloomberg was definitely in there until he opened his mouth on the debate stage, and then that didn't work out so well. But I think there were a lot of people in our neck of the woods that were looking for a Mike Bloomberg type of candidate.
So everybody but Sanders and Warren. So,
And there were others that were on the far left like them that were very difficult for me to be able to support.
So I guess, and did COVID and the Supreme Court impact your decision, or by that time you had already were on board with Biden?
By that time, I was actually very pleased and relieved that Joe was the nominee, because I think he really represents that sort of moderate, patriotic, let's get things done, let's work across the aisle kind of an approach that I was really looking for.
Mm-hmm. Great. I was curious, what are your top 3 news sources?
My top 3 news sources include things like the Washington Post, the Atlantic Magazine, NPR. I try to go like the Congresswoman said, I read the Wall Street Journal. I try not to listen to Fox News so much. But I'd really try to find a whole variety of different news sources from places that I think are trying to give a balanced approach and as objective an approach to the news as possible.
Great. And once this election is over, regardless of who wins, where do we move on as a country? How do we move on as a country?
So in our congregation, the last few years, we have done a civil discourse initiative where we have used the congregation as a place for people to come together to be able to talk with each other about really important issues in a safe and respectful manner. And one of the things that we've learned is that there's a big difference between debate and dialogue. In debate, you're trying to play volleyball, where you're smashing the ball and trying to get the other person to miss so you can score a point. And dialogue is when you're playing catch, where you're trying to give so that the other person can receive it, and they in turn are trying to give it to you so nothing gets dropped. And I think what we really need to do as a country is to learn the art of dialogue, to learn to respect the other person who may look at the world through a different set of lenses than we do, and to respect the humanity that is behind them. But the other thing that I think we really need to do is to return to a sense of what is truly our most important values, and to really return to a sense of morality and character, and try to set aside partisan advantage and power plays for the betterment of what is good for the entire country, so that we as a country can be kind of what Isaiah imagined our people would be, a light to the nations, the paradigm of what good governance, the paradigm of what a whole country can be, to try to really live up to the motto of our nation that says, e pluribus unum, from the many we are one, and to try to foster that sense of unity above partisan difference.
Thank you. Thank you. That was lovely. Thank you. Great. Okay. So now Ruth is back with us. So now we're going to go meet a Republican, and who is one of our many Republicans in our study. Let me start with the question again. Who was your first choice? Did your thinking evolve? Who did you vote for, or who are you going to be voting for?
So I considered myself a lifelong Democrat, and I voted Democrat my entire adult life until 2016. I was quite the champion for Obama, and I was disappointed. I was disappointed in him as a human being. I was disappointed in this country. I was disappointed in his administration. So when 2016 rolled around, I was sick and tired of, just turning the same shirt inside out and wearing it again. And that's what Hillary Clinton felt like to me. I lost a lot of respect for her when Bill Clinton acted like he acted, and she just stood by as if nothing. And I expected more from her in terms of empowering women, and I didn't get that from her. So despite being a woman and despite being a very outspoken woman, I could not vote for her. I was not a fan of Trump. I voted for him because I felt it was the lesser of two evils at that time. And quite honestly, I'm ecstatic. His policies have made me so happy and so proud to be an American.
Mm-hmm. So he was your first choice, and you have stayed with that choice, and you feel very good about that choice.
I think if someone came along in the Democrat Party that I really respected and really saw as someone able to make changes, I would be open to conversation and discussion. I don't think after 47 years of doing nothing that Biden will suddenly do something. And I don't want to keep playing the same hamster wheel.
But how do you feel? I guess you mentioned you were disappointed in Obama as a person, and you feel disappointed in Trump as a person, or not the same?
No, I think Trump came on as the rough-edged person that he is, and for any of us to not have seen it would have been silly. He is what he is. He's very businesslike. He's very money-focused. He's not sugar-coated. And quite honestly, I'm a lot like that.
Okay. So COVID and the Supreme Court, they didn't impact your decision at all?
They did not. I think COVID is what it is. I think COVID in many ways is a wonderful blessing to this world. We all needed to slow down. We all needed to refocus, and COVID made us do it. So despite the deaths and despite the hardships, I do believe COVID has many very positive aspects.
Supreme Court, you mentioned that you were very pro-woman also, and I know from having read your stuff written and talked about, is that you're also choice. And I was just curious how that impacts the Supreme Court, like Amy Coney Barrett's nomination, what do you think?
Right. So I'm not a fan of very religious people. I'm not only pro-choice, I am pro-abortion. I not only think a woman has a right to do what she wants with her body, but if you bring children into this world and abuse them, you need to be sterilized, and I won't beat around the bush about it. So I can't say that I'm a tremendous fan of her personal life. I hope she can separate that and not bring her personal views into the Supreme Court.
Great. And what are your top 3 news sources?
Well, I actually do watch quite a bit of CNN and Fox, because I do like to see both sides. I am a very big follower of Ben Shapiro, of Dan Bongino. I love people who work hard and just say things straight out. And so I follow a lot of different personalities.
Great. And once the election is over, regardless of who wins, how do we move on as a country?
I hope that we move on as a country by everybody sort of getting off the everybody owes me mentality and becomes useful. And I think that when people are useful in this world, when they have a purpose, they don't spend their time fighting, burning down buildings, demanding what they feel they deserve. I really hope to see a lot of benefits cut off, and people who don't work should feel what it's really like when you don't live in a cushiony country that pays for everything you need and you never get to fall down flat.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing your views. And okay, now we're going to our independent, which is Mark. Hi, Mark. Can you unmute yourself? Thank you. So Mark, maybe I'm not fair.
Nadine?
Not fairly, I'm not, yes, Suzanne, introduce him and I might
Yeah,
be
let me, and I'll also,
barely saying who he is. Okay.
right, I want to get you in the spotlight, myself
Yeah.
in the spotlight. Okay. So first of all, thank you, Mark, for joining us. Mark is a Republican from North Carolina. He's an attorney and he was a Reagan appointee for the Department of Housing and Urban Development and has been working in that field for over 30 years. Let me just give you some quick background on the Jewish community or population in North Carolina. North Carolina has a Jewish population of 112,500 Jews, which is 1.1% of the population. It consists of 45.4% of Democrats, 20.4% Republicans, and 32.2% of independents.
Great. So Mark, I may have I think I unfairly characterized you as an independent. I apologize. So let me start with, who was your first choice in the process during this campaign? Did your thinking evolve, and who did you end? I know you already voted, so who did you end up voting for?
So, first of all, let me acknowledge the Congresswoman, who I have had the pleasure of meeting before, and it's great to be with her again. But I guess what I would say is that this was an election that I struggled with a great deal. I am a conservative. I am a Reagan conservative. There are many good things that President Trump has done. First of all, the most recent, obviously, was the peace deals with the UAE and Bahrain. I think also the fact the rise of anti-Semitism in the country is an extraordinarily important issue to me. And the fact that the president, with his executive order, adopted the international standard against anti-Semitism was extraordinarily important. In the end, though, for me, I ended up voting Libertarian because character is a very important thing to me, and tone from the top is extraordinarily important. And so I couldn't get comfortable with voting for the president, even though I acknowledge he has done many things on issues that I care about that are extraordinarily positive. And I was waiting and watching Vice President Biden, and in the end, I was very worried that we would return to what I look at as flawed policies as it relates in the Middle East, particularly with Iran. And I was actually extraordinarily frustrated when he said he wouldn't answer the question about, would he pack the Supreme Court? I understand it's good politics, but I'm tired of people not answering straightforwardly what their positions are going to be.
And how did COVID, or I guess you support his Supreme Court decisions, I guess, but so COVID and the Supreme Court, did they not?
COVID again was an example of where I mean, there certainly were things that the administration did well with COVID. Certainly the aggressive move in what they call warp speed in trying to find a drug and a vaccine solution. I think that was great. I think the fact that they utilized the private sector was important. His inability to communicate what I would describe as a consistent message, I thought was very disappointing. The Supreme Court, I am okay with conservative justices, but that's not, again, and I happen to be a pro-choice Republican. There aren't many of those folks still around, but the Supreme Court wasn't what drove me. What frustrated me was the vice president's unwillingness to answer a straightforward question.
Great. And what are your top 3 news sources?
So Wall Street Journal first, Washington Post second, and probably I listen to some conservative blogs and podcasts.
Great, thank you. So once the election is over, where are we? How are we going to move on as a nation?
Yeah, I worry a lot. I mean, about that. I mean, I'm hopeful, and I'm going to date myself, but I mean, I'm hopeful that if Vice President Biden wins, that he'll be a Jerry Ford kind of president, someone who, you know, sort of tries to reset and doesn't move forward to the left. I worry a lot that the Democratic Party, for those of us who are, it doesn't really reflect any of the or many of the values that I reflect. But you know, I think moving forward, it really is going to be trying to get people used to be in the Jewish community. And I guess I'd say as a nation as a whole, you used to be able to have, you know, discussions where, you know, you could respectfully disagree with somebody. And what I find today is that, you know, particularly, I mean, again, obviously I'm looking at it from a conservative point of view, but particularly many of my friends on the left, and clearly there are way more friends on the left than on the right, you can't even have a discussion because they just don't even, I mean, they identify you as a conservative, and so you should be largely canceled. And I mean, you know, I look at my own synagogue, and it's moved so far to the left that, you know, it's hard to feel comfortable.
So you mentioned what would happen if the Democrats win, but what if Trump wins? Where do you think we are?
Well, I think we're stuck. I mean, I think we're stuck. I mean, the president isn't going to transform himself. I mean, he is a in-your-face kind of person, and you know, so, and I mean, I would think the Democratic Party will go crazy. I mean, you know, and you know, so we're going to be stuck in, you know, one of the rings of hell for a longer period of time. I mean, you know, the vice president left his own designs, might, you know, try to bring us, as I say, back to sort of what I call a Jerry Ford kind of time. But I'm not convinced that the party will let him be that way. And you know, I hope that my big hope on civility is that the business community, which I think has really stepped forward in an extraordinarily positive way. My hope is that, you know, the private sector will lead the way in trying to get what I call a level of tolerance and less abrasiveness going, you know, first in the workplace, but in the society as a whole. Because I just have more confidence in private sector leaders who recognize the need for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. So now I want to turn to Lynn, sweet, who you should also click yourself so we can hear you. Thank you. And Lynn, who I've known for years and has been covering politics for years, I wanted to see what you heard from 4 of our 30 voters. And we have also, by the way, not in this mix, although we obviously have them, are more progressive Democrats, but we'll have more of them in the future. So we have this wide range of voters, and I was wondering what you thought about what you've heard today so far, and also if you want to give us some national context in which how these, you know, what these voters are saying, how they fit in.
Well, thank you, Nadine, and welcome to everybody in the Moment magazine family that is watching this today. I would just want to put on the table a question we did not explore, and that is, according to this the AJC, the American Jewish Committee poll, Nadine, that you cited in the beginning, and people I've talked to who are familiar with the Jewish vote in the United States said the most predictive factor is what movement of Judaism you belong to. And by far, we know this by polls and anecdotally, that the Orthodox community has been drifting more Republican and is overwhelmingly pro-Trump. We also have seen other signs of political activism in the Orthodox community in New York, for example, in their protest against crowd caps because of COVID, but that doesn't matter because New York is a blue state. So where you look at where the Jewish vote counts, the state where the Jewish population will have the most impact is probably in Florida. So there are a few things to know about the Jewish vote, no matter where it goes, and that is why Jews are a relatively small number. As you've noted, Jews do vote out of proportion. So we punch above our weight. So on the question of how we move on as a country that Nadine has raised to our multiple panelists and questions about civility, part of it is, I think, goes back to the movements of the different ways Jews in America approach the next chapter, whether it's with Biden and Trump. We know that it's highly likely that most Jews will vote overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. But when you go back to the states and go back to the Jewish communities, the thing to watch for, I think, especially in the COVID era, where the Orthodox in particular have taken some stands against crowd control, is what do we do within our own Jewish community? How does the politics of COVID, in the context of whether or not Trump or Biden is elected, how that translates into what our various Jewish communities do? And let me put this out there. We say Jewish community, but we're not monolithic. We don't all vote the same. And the very active Orthodox community has as its challenge whether it's as organized and will come out to vote. And I think, again, the most interesting place to see where this all will play out is in Florida, where you have every strain of Jewish movement.
Great, those are all great comments. Let me just say a couple things. One is we did include a number of Orthodox voters in our study. I do know from at least one of them was actually a Bernie Sanders supporter. So it's very hard to, again, even stereotype, any voters. But we do have a number of them. We just didn't include them today. But that's actually a very good point, is that we have divided along denominational lines in the Jewish community. So, and I do think that Florida is one of our is really fascinating because it's the swing state of all swing states, really, right now. And there's 450,000 Jews in Southeast Florida. And those Jews are really getting a tremendous amount of ads from both campaigns targeted at them. And they are kind of a real swing vote within the swing voters of the state of Florida. So that's something that's just fascinating to watch.
Well, just one other quick thing. The Biden campaign is doing tremendous Jewish outreach in ways that are a little different. This is just for what it's worth, as long as I have you. Later today, the Jewish Americans for Biden are going to host What's at Stake, Social Justice and the Climate Crisis with Senator Ed Markey and Lily Tomlin. The Trump campaign, meanwhile, as you know, on the stump is also, let me throw this out there in case anyone is interested in addressing this, many of the issues that may animate a Jewish vote are used by Trump also to animate and turn out the evangelical vote.
Yes, that's true. It's a very good point. Yes. I think another thing that came up a lot in our study that we've done is that obviously what are the important issues? And we didn't really get to address that specifically today, but obviously there are a number of Jewish voters who are single issue voters on Israel, and that they were very impacted by the UAE deal, with the Israel-UAE deal.
But let's break that down a little more, Nadine. That really is an overwhelming issue for, I would say, the strict Orthodox vote, less so according to non-affiliated Jews.
Yes.
The social issues are more of a motivation.
Yes.
The domestic issues than.
Yes, and we see that in our study very clearly, that the Jews, generally most Jews, liberal Jews, are concerned about healthcare, COVID, Suzanne's jump up, women's issues, and what was the other one?
Well, the top three issues, and I want to make a point that this I want to make a point that the initial discussion about the issues that voters were concerned about, their top 3 or 4, took place back in October. So this was pre-COVID, before all of the marches and stuff like that. So for the Democrats, the top issue was climate change, healthcare, women's issues, and 4th was gun policy. For the Republicans, it was Israel, the economy, and immigration and borders. But I think it's important, though, to point out that while Israel was not the top concern for our Democratic participants, every single solitary one of them said Israel was important to them. And they all said that if there was a candidate who was anti-Israel, they absolutely wouldn't vote for them. So it may not be in their top 4, but it's definitely something that's important to them.
I want to point out that why, and I'm sure many people who are listening will jump to the chat, but bear me out. There is not one uniform definition on what it means to be pro-Israel, but in general, every presidential candidate supports military aid to Israel, and why there are differences about questions of the settlements and aid to Palestinians. You still have, in the broader issue of the most important, one of the most important elements of security, Israeli security, you have support. Now, I'm saying this understanding that there is a divide over whether or not the Iran nuclear deal is good or bad for the security of Israel. But put that, I know that is out there, and we don't want to consume the rest of the time debating that, but reasonable people do disagree on it. And if you want to cast a vote based on the Iran nuclear deal position, that's out there, and I know that that's of concern, but these policy differences don't make it a black and white issue. One is for Israel, one is against, because there are multiple issues on the table when we talk about United States support of Israel.
And also, I do want to point out that, of course, don't want to stereotype anyone, because there are many Orthodox Jews who are Democrats, and there are many non-Orthodox Jews who would consider Israel to be one of the most important issues that is on the table. So we're going to be very careful not to stereotype people here. I can see in the chat people are concerned. And one of the things we're really doing in this study is really taking a deep dive, but not being judgmental here. So I wanted to say that we actually do have another, I think on election day, we have another Zoominar where we're going to take a deep dive into the history of American Jews in presidential elections, which is fascinating to see how Jews have voted in the past. And right now, from what I can see, it's not significantly different. Despite all the changes going on, we're pretty much similar. We have similar percentages to what we've had in recent decades. So anything else you'd like to add here, Lynn, before we go? And we have great, thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to go back to our wonderful participants. Thank you so much for being here. To Mark Goldhaber and Shelley Berkley, Rabbi Dan Levin, and Ruth Kantrowitz. And I want to, first of all, just thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your thoughts so honestly. And I also wanted to ask you just what it was like to participate in a study. Remember, we've been talking to these folks. We've 30 people. We've been calling them and interviewing them and emailing them and sending them messages for already it's like 14 months. And of course, when we came up with this project, we really had no idea of all the things that were going to be happening and all the changes that would be occurring and how much we would need to talk to them. And I just wanted to know what it's been like to be, from each one of you for maybe 1 minute, what it's been like to be having to pay so much attention and answering these kind of questions. And we can just start, maybe we'll start with Mark.
So, I mean, I found it interesting in the sense of it's made me think more deeply. I mean, and I'm, as I said in my broader comments, I'm very concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism, particularly on U.S. college campuses. And so, and as I've tried to answer the questions, it has brought greater clarity to me about the issues that matter to me. Yeah, the politics hasn't clarified itself a lot. but it was, you know, it was a great experience, and I enjoyed, you know, working with Suzanne and the team. But as I said, I think it brought more sharpness to how I thought about important issues.
Great, thank you. And how about Shelley?
Yes, thank you so much. And I want to say hello to Mark also. It's nice to see him. I enjoyed this very much. And if you ever do anything like this again, I hope you will keep me in your Rolodex. I would love to participate again. But there's one thing I want to leave everybody with. When my grandparents came to America, and I'm only second generation American, they didn't come here to be a Republican or a Democrat. They came here to be an American. And I can't help but think that somehow we've lost sight of that. And as a second generation American, I keep that paramount in my mind, that this is a very special country and it is worth fighting for and voting for. And that's why it is so significant what you're doing and encouraging people to exercise their right as an American citizen and vote.
Thank you. And Ruth, can you unmute yourself now? The same question to you, what it's been like, and what it's been like to be a participant in this study?
In many ways, it was very nerve-wracking. I had the privilege of having a debate with Hannah Rosenthal, sorry. To be in the same Zoom with the likes of, Mark and Shelley, it's quite an honor. I have the privilege of being an immigrant, of being a woman, of starting businesses from scratch, and this country is what gave me those opportunities. I have come across many, many people in my work who don't seem to really treasure the beauty of the possibilities that we have here and simply take things for granted. And it's been quite an experience to follow along as closely as I have, because I really was never so political previously in my life, but 2016 changed a lot.
Great, thank you, thank you. And Dan, what about you?
Well, I was really honored to be invited to participate, and I found that having to answer the questions on a regular basis really forced me to do a lot of introspection and thinking about what do I believe and what do I really care about. And so I appreciate the opportunity to do that. I think also one of the things that really kind of amazed me was how two people can look at the very same set of things and see them so differently. And to hopefully make room in our hearts for a little bit of humility to appreciate the fact that we don't necessarily have a monopoly on the truth, no matter what perspective we hold on to.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Lastly, I think that more now than ever, I so deeply appreciate how grateful and fortunate we are that we get to live in the United States of America. The world has not been kind to Jews when there wasn't a functional democracy that adhered to the rule of law and that respected the rights of its minorities and to practice the religion as they choose. And we have to do everything we possibly can to secure our democracy, because this has been a place that the Jewish people hasn't really known in its entire history of its diaspora.
Thank you. That's a wonderful way to end this. I just want to say that to add to that one of the amazing things in this study, and we have a lot more to go. We have to get through the election, and we really won't have all our findings until January. It's the amount of nuance that every single person really thinks has taken it very seriously and has brought their own thinking to this, and has a lot of nuance. There's no two people in the study that has been the same. And that's been like, there's no way to make generalizing doesn't really help, but listening to people and hearing what they have to think, you do learn a tremendous amount about what they're thinking. And that's really important. It's very important for us to hear how other people think. So so again, there's a lot more to come with this study. and we'll be having more in the magazine. We've already had, you can go to the website, Suzanne will tell you about that, where we've already had some amazing interviews between some of the different debates or conversations really between some of the Republicans and Democrats that have been part of the process, very civil debates. So all of that will be up there, and there's more to come. And now I'm going to send us back to Suzanne. Also, I want to thank Suzanne for running this project, and it's a big project to stay in touch with 30 people, with different interviewers, and putting all the numbers together. And she's done an amazing job.
Thank you. Thank you,
Suzanne.
Nadine. And again, thank all of you, Rabbi Dan, Congresswoman Shelley, Ruth, Mark, Lynn Sweet. Thank you. Let's bring Lynn back in here for a moment. Thank you all for participating. And as Nadine said, there's so much more on our website at momentmag.com/JPVP. It's at the top of our website, and you can go on there and you can meet the rest of our participants. We have 26 more participants, as Nadine said, from 10 different states. Not only do we have information about the Jewish vote in each state, we have the interviews with each person, and then throughout the course of this last year, every few months we have checked in with people, and we have their responses to what the experience was like being a caucus leader, what the experience was like voting in New Hampshire. Well, not New Hampshire. We thought about New Hampshire, but what it was like being in the caucus in Nevada, what their thoughts were on all of the protests going on. And so you can really get a sense of what voters are thinking if you go to our website. Again, please join us next week. As I mentioned, we will be having a wonderful conversation with Joan Nathan, and then the following week, as a way to look at politics without getting into all the craziness of the day, we have Jonathan Sarna and Lauren Strauss joining us for a look into the history of Jewish involvement in presidential elections. So again, thank you to our participants. Thank you for everyone who is watching, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.